What if death wasn't a biological requirement? Not a metaphor, not a thought experiment. An actual, working loophole, already discovered, already sitting in a tide pool somewhere, smaller than your fingernail. There is one confirmed animal on Earth that, under the right conditions, does not have to die of old age. Not lives a very long time. Not regenerates lost limbs. Actually reverses its own aging, resets its body back to infancy, and starts over, as many times as it needs to. This isn't science fiction. It's a real jellyfish, and understanding how it pulls this off might be one of the strangest, most quietly important stories in modern biology. Its name is Turritopsis dohrnii, and it was first described all the way back in 1883 in the Mediterranean Sea. For over a century, it sat in scientific records as just another obscure, forgettable hydrozoan, something adjacent to a jellyfish, smaller than a pinky nail, transparent, with a small bright red stomach visible through its bell. Nobody thought much of it. Then, in the early 1990s, a group of researchers, including marine biologist Volker Schmid, started noticing something that didn't make sense. When they stressed these jellyfish in lab tanks, starving them, injuring them, changing the water's temperature or salt content, the animals didn't die the way jellyfish are supposed to. Instead, they shrank. They lost their tentacles. Their swimming bell collapsed inward. Within about a day, each one had transformed into a small, undifferentiated blob of cells, sitting on the bottom of the tank, and then, over the following 24 to 72 hours, that blob rebuilt itself, from scratch, into a polyp, which is, critically, the very first stage of a jellyfish's life. Not a wounded adult. Not a scarred survivor. A newborn, genetically identical, starting the entire life cycle completely over. One of the researchers involved, Stefano Perino, later recalled the reaction this discovery got outside the lab. This was certainly a point of interest for the media, he said, because they claimed that we had discovered the elixir of immortality. The scientific community's enthusiasm actually cooled off for nearly a decade afterward, treating it as an interesting but minor curiosity, until later discoveries put this jellyfish firmly back on the map. The scientific term for what's happening at the cellular level is transdifferentiation, and it's worth sitting with how strange this actually is. Imagine baking a cake. Flour, eggs, sugar, all combined and transformed by heat into something new. Now imagine that cake spontaneously reorganizing itself back into raw flour, eggs, and sugar, ready to be baked into a completely different recipe. That's roughly the biological equivalent of what's happening inside this jellyfish. Its cells aren't just healing or multiplying. Specialized cells that were doing one specific job, like forming part of a tentacle or a stomach lining, are actually converting into entirely different cell types, the way a skin cell might reprogram itself into a nerve cell. In most animals, including humans, this kind of cellular identity switch essentially doesn't happen outside of extremely rare, extreme circumstances, if it happens at all. In Turritopsis dohrnii, it appears to be a fully functional, repeatable survival strategy. And repeatable is the key word, because this isn't a one-time trick. Researchers have documented, in lab settings, individual jellyfish going through this reversal again and again and again, essentially indefinitely, with reported success rates approaching 100% under controlled conditions. Every time the cycle completes, the resulting polyp colony eventually buds off new medusae, new adult jellyfish, that are genetically identical to the one that died and restarted. As far as biologists can tell, there is no built-in expiration date written into this animal's genetics. Old age, on its own, simply isn't something that kills it. Now, before this starts sounding like a loophole you could somehow exploit yourself, it's worth being precise about what immortal does and doesn't mean here. This jellyfish is not invincible. It can absolutely still be eaten by a predator. It can still die of disease. A physical injury severe enough to destroy the specific tissue layers needed to trigger the reversal process can still end its life permanently, the same as almost any other small marine organism. In the wild, most individual Turritopsis dohrnii probably never get the chance to use this ability even once, simply because the ocean is full of things that eat tiny, defenseless jellyfish long before old age would ever become the problem. It's also worth knowing this animal isn't visually identical everywhere it's found. Depending on region, its appearance actually shifts. Jellyfish from tropical waters tend to keep a fixed 8 tentacles their entire life, while those from more temperate waters can grow up to 24, a detail researchers use to help track its spread. Biological immortality, in this case, doesn't mean unkillable. It means that the specific mechanism of aging to death, senescence, cellular decline over time, has essentially been switched off, or at least made optional, as long as nothing else gets to it first. So why does any of this matter beyond being a genuinely fascinating piece of trivia? Because researchers studying this species aren't doing it out of pure curiosity about a tiny sea creature. They're doing it because the genetic machinery involved appears to overlap, at least conceptually, with some of the same biological pathways scientists have been trying to unlock in human aging research for decades. In 2022, a genomic study comparing Turritopsis dohrnii to a closely related, non-immortal jellyfish species found something significant. T. dohrnii had extra copies of genes specifically involved in DNA repair and protection, genes that could apparently be switched on or off depending on which stage of its life cycle it was in. Other research has identified activity involving genes closely related to what are known as the Yamanaka factors, a set of 4 specific genes that, in a landmark human stem cell breakthrough published in 2006, could be used to reprogram an ordinary adult skin cell backward in time, biologically speaking, into something resembling an embryonic stem cell, capable of becoming almost any cell type in the body. That discovery, made by Shinya Yamanaka, was significant enough to win a Nobel Prize in 2012, and it's still one of the foundational tools of modern regenerative medicine. This jellyfish appears to be running its own natural, in-body version of that exact kind of reprogramming as a routine survival response, without a single scientist, lab, or piece of equipment involved. There's a genuinely strange thought buried in that comparison. Humans spent decades in a lab, working out how to force a handful of genes to rewind a cell's identity, and celebrated it as one of biology's great breakthroughs. This animal appears to have been doing something functionally similar, unassisted, for millions of years, entirely by accident of evolution, without anyone ever needing to write a research paper about it first. None of this means scientists are anywhere close to giving humans the ability to reverse aging the way this jellyfish does. The differences in complexity between a body with trillions of specialized, interconnected cells and organs and a small, structurally simple hydrozoan are enormous. But researchers studying T. dohrnii have specifically pointed to it as a natural, real-world model for understanding regeneration, cellular reprogramming, and what actually causes cells to age in the first place. Knowledge that could eventually feed into treatments for degenerative diseases, tissue damage, and the basic biology of why most living things run down over time in the first place. As one researcher put it, studying this jellyfish won't make us immortal, but it may open up genuinely new strategies for treating damaged tissue and organs down the line. There's one more genuinely strange detail worth knowing. Almost a footnote, except that it might be the most consequential part of the whole story. Because this jellyfish can reset itself instead of dying, and because its polyp stage can survive being carried in ballast water, researchers have identified Turritopsis dohrnii as an unusually effective global hitchhiker. It has now been documented not just in the Mediterranean, but off Japan, Panama, Brazil, the Gulf of Mexico, Turkey, and California. Genetically near-identical populations, spread by accident, on cargo ships crossing the entire planet. An animal that figured out how to cheat death also, almost as a side effect, figured out how to cheat geography. So, back to the question we open with. What if death wasn't a hard biological requirement? For one very small, very strange animal, the answer already exists, and it isn't a myth, a legend, or a piece of speculative fiction. It's a jellyfish, sitting quietly in tide pools and harbors around the world, that solved a problem the rest of the animal kingdom has spent its entire evolutionary history simply accepting. It didn't get faster. It didn't get bigger. It didn't grow armor or venom or any of the usual survival tools nature hands out. It just, under the right circumstances, refuses to stay old. And maybe that's the part worth sitting with the longest. We tend to treat aging and death as a single, fixed rule of biology, something every living thing simply has to accept, the same way everything has to accept gravity. This jellyfish is a working counterexample to that assumption, sitting in shallow water, smaller than a fingernail, mostly ignored for over 100 years before anyone realized what they were actually looking at. Every time it resets itself, somewhere, quietly, one of biology's most permanent-seeming rules gets broken all over again. And every time a researcher studies exactly how it pulls that off, we get a little closer to understanding whether permanent was ever really the right word for it in the first place.